So I think having the modern world become more natural is the trend that I'm seeing occurring. And I think that's going to be a very good thing, Dan.
Phenomenal. I am so glad to have this amazing gentleman in the house because he's one of the most well-connected electric vehicle specialists. You should check him out on LinkedIn. Literally millions of engagement points with industry experts. He's been in the auto sector for the last 33 years, the last 15 years, really hyper-focused in this space that we're going to be talking about. He champions, the companies, the technologies, the peoples are making a difference. He's a founder at Electric Vehicle Outlook, and he has a podcast, and he's the show host. So in many ways, I, DanRam, am a little bit intimidated having this conversation with a fellow host over here. But please welcome, virtual applause for Roger Atkins. It's good to see you, man.
Dan, I've learned everything I know from you. So you've just built yourself up, basically.
Don't put that pressure.
Thank you so much for all of that.
Don't put that pressure right at the start. Look, we're really glad to have you here. Obviously, this is where the future of mobility is being discussed. And so we could not have that conversation without having you in the house because, of course, you have made this your business, not just for a few days, but for the last 15 years and longer. So thank you in advance for what you're going to share. If people are watching right now, make sure you grab a pen and a paper and scribble some of these thoughts in here. But let's jump right into this because when we were emailing back and forth, you had a quote that, to me, I think symbolizes so much of what's going on. I'm going to test you to see if you know the second half of the quote. It starts like this. Things take longer than you thought they would, and then?
They change faster than you thought they could.
What does that mean in this space?
So, well, in the space of when it was originally written, it was a German economist, Rüdiger Dornbusch. And yeah, this was about just understanding how things can surprise you. So to be prepared, I think, was his principal message. In the context of mobility, I think where we are now with electrification, electric cars in particular, people have been now surprised by the awareness of the electric vehicle proposition, the choice that's now quickly come to market, and in some countries, the incredible adoption rate of the EV over the internal combustion engine. And I'm thinking of countries like Norway, the Netherlands to some extent, and certainly in China. So that's really at the heart of where that particular quote, I think, is very relevant for automotive and for mobility, and actually a lot of other things, Dan.
You and I are a little bit of a tech bubble. So in some ways, we're fortunate to see some of these discussions. And then it hits a critical point where it accelerates, right? So
Yep.
there's a period of discussion, conversation. Could it happen? Could it not? And then there's a critical mass. And all of a sudden, you have this influx of what seems to be out of nowhere, sudden new innovation and ideas. Can you give us some examples of maybe where this quote has come into play? And then we'll bring it to the electric vehicle space. But what are other things that you think have had that, the world's been coasting? There's been something in the undercurrent of our conversation, and then bam, all of a sudden, we now have an acceleration of innovation in this space.
Well, I can think of a few examples. I mean, the kind of big daddy of it all, if we want to call it that, is basically, where we've been with this global COVID pandemic. Things happen slower than you thought they would. Then bang, things happen quicker than you thought they could. Within the space of a few weeks, a couple of months, you had what was in one location, then everywhere in the world. That was obviously tragic and not very good. However, I always like to top and tail. I always like to have a nice ending to these things, Dan, as I think you know. If you then look at how vaccines were developed and manufactured faster than ever before, again, picking up on Mr. Dornbusch's proposition, normally vaccines take 3, 4, 5 years. These were being sequenced, genosequenced, and then produced within weeks and months, which is extraordinary. So it just goes to show you what can happen. Another thing in terms of a bigger picture thing, some years ago now, actually, you may not have even been born, Dan. I was, in the 1980s, you had a big issue which emerged called the hole in the ozone layer. And, this had been emerging over time. And it was a real looming challenge in terms of all sorts of difficulties for people on Earth, for everything on Earth, basically. But again, with collective ambition, with really smart technology, and with people coming together, that the hole in the ozone layer effectively was fixed, and pretty quickly. So that's another example, I think. So there's lots of them around to give you that illustration of how things quickly can change. But I suppose the bit that really focuses the mind above all else is the issue about climate change and the fact that we've gone up to 420 parts per million of carbon in the air quicker than we've ever gone up to it in any point in history, not even human history, the history of the planet. So what we've now got to do, picking up on that theme of things change quick and then you've got to be prepared for them, is react rapidly to adapt to what's happened with that climatic change, and find remedies, find solutions, find countermeasures for it that are genuine and sustainable, not just greenwash and sticking plasters. We've got to have things that really are going to make a difference. So that's a quick run through all of that, Dan. I've spoken so much, I need a glass of water now.
Get a glass of water. It made me think about even just how we are engaging right now, you and I, as well as our audience, right? Physical and virtual. I remember the beginning of the pandemic, the entire event industry and just how we learn to network through events was like, oh, we're done. We cannot travel anymore. We cannot meet in person. And for a long time, it was just this doom and gloom story. And then people started creating. And today, when we're recording this, we have so many options as to how, and so much new hardware innovation, so much software innovation, so many tools that are out there. And we keep learning more and more about how we can enhance this experience. So yes to this amazing quote, things take longer than you thought they would, and then things change faster than you thought they could. But when I think about learning, Roger, what is interesting is sometimes, I would argue often, learning is not linear, right? There are ideas and thoughts from other industries, and it's the cross-pollination of ideas, the cross-pollination of people that create some of the coolest solutions moving forward, especially when it comes to sustainability. Can we talk a little bit about that and just the importance of, because you've got your hands and feet in a couple different pots as well. Any examples of that kind of cross-pollination of learning?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dan, and it's really important. And in some ways, it's surprising that there isn't more cross-pollination. There isn't more kind of industry across industry collaboration with things, because like never before in human history, as you kind of outlined, we can, at the touch of a button, be talking to someone on the other side of the world. The access to knowledge, people, information, groups, teams, etc. It's profound. It is quite extraordinary. But to answer your question, because I do always like to try to answer questions rather than ramble. So, Formula One. Okay. I believe that Formula One, I have for some time felt this, Formula One has much more to contribute than just these fantastically fast and glamorous cars that you see on a Sunday afternoon racing around tracks. If you look at what they can deliver in terms of technology, I felt so passionate about this, Dan. I recently made a little documentary. I'd always wanted to be a movie maker, never made one in my life, thought, how do we go about it? And I thought, well, the only way to go about it is to make one. And then you'll find out whether, learn some lessons on the way. So I made a documentary.
Hold on. Motorsport in the electric age. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, cool. I mean, we should give you a shout out for that, right? So I just want to pause before you move on too quickly about this documentary that you made. So if anyone wants to check that out, it's called Motorsport in the Electric Age. Sorry, continue on. Tell me more.
No problem with a shout out. That's appreciated. So what did I learn in that? Well, what I learned, I've hopefully shared with people, which is there's a lot going on in Formula E, that's Formula E and Formula One, by the way, all motorsport, but particularly the pinnacle of engineering, which indeed is Formula One, that can be applied to many other things. So, for example, Williams, one of the most respected Formula One teams in the paddock, haven't been winning so much lately, but they're still a really, really good team. They have developed in their applied technologies division the ability in refrigeration to be much more efficient, more effective. Now, how and why did they do that? Well, if there's one thing people in Formula One are very, very good at, it's aerodynamics. the movement of air, getting downforce to keep the car on the road to make it go fast. But that knowledge of aero impacts incredibly well on how refrigeration works in cold cabinets in big shops and supermarkets to flow it through much more efficiently and make sure the cool air that they're using is used to do the job it was intended. It doesn't spill out into the aisle and you walk up and down there in your shorts thinking, am I on the North Pole or something?
Right.
So that kind of stuff. But, there is a lot going on in Formula One. I think Formula One is about to reinvent itself, Dan. It's going to go from just being about racing to being about technology solutions provision. Then they happen to go racing on a Sunday afternoon. That I think they're going to reorientate themselves and surprise a lot of people. And in the video I made, which you kindly just queued up for me, that's what came across. Very much that's what came across.
I think also when we think about the champions in this space, we have to take a moment to recognize that some of the literal Formula One champions are now leading the charge when it comes to the future of mobility, right? There are entire conferences they're building, there's entire networks that they're creating to go, this entire ecosystem, we got to think about it. So it's not just with the parts where we see innovation, where what was created for racing and creating the fastest vehicles is now coming into our vehicles that we see on the road, but it's even with the mindset, the attitude, and like you're saying, redefining what that sport is about. And I think in the past, it was about having the fastest car. And I think now it's already becoming about what's sustainable, what's good for the planet. It's a complete mindset shift.
It is, Dan. And I think you might be alluding to, well, probably a few people, but one in particular, Nico Rosberg.
Yes.
And I knew where that was going, but it's not just that Nico's learned what he's learned and has a passion for it, and he has children and all the obvious things. It's, I think, again, going back to Formula One, how good they are at teamwork, how good and quick they are at solutions, providing solutions to things, and thinking really smartly. And they don't even have a box, Dan, that they have to think outside of. In Formula One, there never was a box.
That's true.
That's how clever they are. But to give you an example, in the film, I spoke to Paddy Lowe, who used to be the race engineer for Ayrton Senna, I think for Nico Rosberg as well, actually, Lewis Hamilton, a number of people. So in other words, a really smart guy. He's developing petrosynthesis, synthetic fuel. Okay. So nothing to do with getting fossil fuels out of the ground. This is about using technology and innovation, particularly renewables, to create synthetic fuel to power up and create petroleum. It takes a little bit of getting your head, around it, because I'm sitting with this guy who's a great engineer, and I really know very little. My stock in trade is knowing people who know a lot, and then just taking a little bit of it, Dan, and then putting that in front of people. That's what I'm going to be doing in Munich. You're going to have great people on the stage. I'm going to be talking to real experts. It was very flattering and kind of you to say what you said at the beginning, but I'm thinking, Dan, I'm going to sound like a fraud, because I suppose I'm an expert generalist, if I kind of put it in a nutshell.
And it's an important role, because, the connections, we're just talking about cross-pollination, right? So someone who's able to connect all the different parts is so key and so important to this. Now, I know for me, I'm having the chance to listen to you, and just like you were talking to this engineer and going, whoa, this is so futuristic, and I'm barely holding on, but I'm excited for what I understand. I'm hoping you can give a little piece of that for me and for our audience right now. What are some of the future trends? What are some of the mobility trends that you are picking up on right now that you're going, hey, for anyone interested in the space, wanting to invest in the space, wanting to contribute in the space, pay attention to? Do you have a little hit list of some of these things?
Yeah, I kind of do. It begins with the word electric.
Okay,
and then you just put cars, buses, vans, trucks, bikes, aeroplanes. And that's where we are. And then going upstream from that bit, Dan, you've got to get into, well, where does the electricity come from? Increasingly, it must and does come from renewables. So it comes from solar, it comes from wind, it comes from other aspects. And ironically, I think, well, maybe it wasn't ironically, the Chinese have always called electric vehicles new energy vehicles. And I think whether that was intentional or otherwise, That's the whole point of it. You take new energy, renewable energy, sustainable energy, and you use that to electrify mobility. And that's the trend I'm seeing massively, that we are absolutely shifting away from fossil fuels into combustion engine vehicles and other things, because it's just not sustainable. We can't do it because of the twin imperatives that we have, the reduction of CO2 and the improvement of air quality in towns and cities. You go to anywhere in the world, and most towns and cities full of buses and trucks and taxis and vans, they're all polluting cities. They're often diesel, well, mostly they are. And that's the big shift that's underway. So again, to answer your question specifically, I think a mass adoption and a rapid adoption of buses, taxis, vans, and trucks, the things we see a lot of. Maybe not quite so fast an adoption of electric cars, not because they're not good, because they most certainly are, but because perhaps people reflect on, should they own a car at all? Is it not better to share this very expensive asset, an asset rich in all sorts of resources and minerals for the batteries, etc., that all have to come together? So I think we're just going to get a bit smarter, a bit savvier, a bit more like nature in regard to not wasting something. You know, you maximize the utilization and you maximize the efficiency of a given thing. That's what nature does. So I think having the modern world become more natural is the trend that I'm seeing occurring. And I think that's going to be a very good thing, Dan.
You know, when you're saying that, one of the things that excites me is when I see some of these big thinking, these big trends applied at a small level, and especially when there's a sense of personal ownership. Because it's easy to go, these trends are driven by the technologists, or is driven by the government bureaucrats, or is driven by people in the bubble. But recently when I was in India, I heard some amazing stories about a tuk-tuk driver, an auto rickshaw, as it's called in India. So it's a three-wheeler, but just a single owner of an auto rickshaw deciding to do alternative energy. And not just that, had to obviously remodel the craft in order to make it conducive and to work. And I just loved that personal ownership of, hey, I can't wait for this to be in vogue, or I cannot wait for the government to give me a grant on this, but with my own limited engineering skills and with the accessibility that we have now to new solutions, I'm going to figure out a solution to this. And it was really exciting for me to see that ownership really from just an ordinary everyday person. For those who are listening right now and going, Roger, you're on the ball. Yes, there's a future. It is bright, but it's varying. It depends on geographies, depends on economic ability. It depends on so many things, but I want to start somewhere. What are some of your thoughts about the localization of these mega trends? What are your thoughts about, you know what? Small is beautiful. Start with what you got.
Yeah. Again, there's a lot in that question, because I think it comes down to, on an individual basis, like you've done and I've done and many people, you decide to start something. You don't have to be born to it. You don't have to have learned it at college, for example. You just take it upon yourself at a moment in time to go on a journey. And yeah, that takes a bit of confidence. Sometimes people would combine that with stupidity, because people say you can't do that, it won't work, or whatever. All I'd say to people is believe in yourself. Yeah. And even if you make mistakes, as long as you don't, well, to be really blunt, die from it, then it's fine. You know, learning from the mistake is the important thing. But I think we're going to see a lot more innovation from entrepreneurs. We're going to see a lot more things emerge from the bottom up, if you like. And I think across the world, there are cultures that I think much more closer to that anyway. You mentioned India. You know, the thing in India that's always been, I think, an absolute part of life is to repair, is to refresh and renew things, not waste things.
Correct.
In lots of other parts of the world, to be frank, we've become rather lazy. It's easy to throw something away and just get a new one. And that's not sustainable. So it isn't just about great technology or all these sorts of other things. It's a fundamental shift in an attitude towards everybody else, but starting from a local point of view. You know, what can you do in your own town? What can you do in your own city? What can you do with a small group of people? And then, yeah, maybe it scales up, but it doesn't have to become a global phenomenon. It doesn't have to become something that's just big and therefore it's beautiful, because as E.F. Schumacher said, you know, another one I love to quote, small is beautiful. And what he meant by that was small typically is more efficient, is better for the planet. And this was a guy talking about these things, Dan, back in the 1970s. This isn't some guy jumping on a bandwagon now.
Right.
This is about how you think local, act global, and maybe a bit of the other way around. But yeah, we do need to reassign and realign what we do a lot better. There's no doubt about that.
Bringing you on here was simultaneously an honor and also unfair, because 20 minutes is not enough to tap into years and years of research and study and passion, which is very evident in your voice. So the best thing I can do for audience now is to ask you, for anyone that's listening and going, I need to talk to Roger more, how can they find you?
As you kindly said, I have a blog. So, a podcast. See, I do. It's only that new. I couldn't even remember what it was. So I have a podcast called Eclectic and Electric. So I've had on that people like Shai Agassi, who started off battery swapping, some 14, 15 years ago, very successfully. Paddy Lowe, the engineer I mentioned earlier, people making fantastic sports cars. The co-founder of Oculus. A whole range of different people. So it's called Eclectic and Electric to give people a flavor. So please check that out. You can get it on all the usual sort of channels. I hang out on LinkedIn, as you mentioned. I do occasionally mention that from time to time. And by the way, on that last week, I had one of the biggest shares I've ever had. It wasn't anything that I created. It was a charging infrastructure document, a report from India that was produced by the Indian government and people that they'd worked with. And I've got to tell you, it was one of the best things I'd ever seen. I posted it on Friday about 10 o'clock in the morning. By Saturday morning, 150,000 people had viewed it. I was astonished, but it just tapped into the moment, I think, of, EV charging is important. India is on this growth phase now of electrification. So LinkedIn, the podcast. But Dan, here's the thing. I'm going to be at IAA for the whole week, coming on the Monday, leaving on the Saturday. Got a few stages on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But the rest of the time, I should be, I'll be around. So, you can look out for me on LinkedIn. You can see my phone number, Dan. I'm crazy enough to put my phone number there and my email address. So if people want to hang out, meet up, I'm happy to do it. That's why I'm coming.
Fantastic. We cannot wait to have you here. I'm already in Munich right now as we are having this conversation. I'm going to be there as well. I am going to text you and we're going to get that cup of coffee. So I cannot wait to see you. Roger, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for sharing this amazing download. Guys, do check out the podcast, Twitter, LinkedIn, and all the other places you can find him. Roger Atkins, thank you again for being part of today's.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Bye-bye.